So today we get to start showcasing the amazing sudsers who had to patiently wait for me to not understand CMOS for several weeks before they got to show how good they actually are at this and how it's just no big deal whatsoever because they're awesome and great and I love that about them. And sometimes I'm not good at things and they get to help me and I get to showcase them because they help me and that's awesome and I love that. And I will tell you more about today's Project Soapway winner and how amazing her recipe is and why I got selected for this Project Soapway challenge in just a minute. But before I do, hello, I am Mrs. Soap and Clay. Let's make stuff. How's it going, Sudsers? Welcome back to the channel. You are at Soap and Clay, where we make all the soapy things, and you are here for Project Soapway CMOS Challenge, and we are going to be kicking it off with watching Kris10 tackles CMOS. Now, Kris10 is a sudser that I love oh so very much. She is just a person after my own heart as far as her sleuthing. She likes to research things. She likes to find all of the different little threads that she can pull in regards to the legalese, in regards to trademark and copyright laws, in regards to research on recipe formulations and all of the jazz. And I love it. Whenever she has a question in the Discord, I make sure to, get there and answer it or read it or see what everybody's talking about when it comes to that. So that's awesome. With her particular soap, the reason why I was selected is first and foremost because it was a melt and pour from scratch. And so it's a hot process recipe that she used to incorporate CMOS. And I like that because the brief for this particular one was make a CMOS soap. And I did not specify that it had to be cold process or hot process or melt and pour. It could be any of those things. And she chose to do melt and pour from scratch. So a glycerin soap from scratch. And I like that a lot. I definitely like to showcase other soap methods that perhaps we don't do enough of on the channel, and this is one of them. So I'm very, very excited to talk to you about Kris10 tackling the CMOS challenge and what she ultimately decided with her recipe. So let's get to her video and we can do all of that, there. Okay, so Kris10 tackles CMOS soaps, and as I said, we are working with a melt and pour base, so melt and pour from scratch, which is super awesome, and I'm super excited about it because I love doing hot process recipes, and I love it when the sudsers want to do it as well. And so what we are working with for this recipe is 30% coconut oil, 31% shea, 4% bees, 22% olive, 13% castor, and then in the water, she has her CMOS and 4 tablespoons of kaolin clay and 75 to 100% of the total oil weight in glycerin. And she has in parentheses that she has 13 ounces. So that's what we're using. Now, with this particular recipe, what she's going to be doing is much like you would do with a regular cold process soap recipe. She's going to take all of her oils and butters and weigh them out, and then she's going to melt them down. But then she's going to put a lye solution into these heated oils and mix it up until it hits an emulsion. And then she's going to let it cook for a little bit. And that is effectively how you do hot process. Now, at that stage in hot process, once it has cooked for, in my experience, around 10 to 15 minutes, really what we're doing is we are speeding up saponification and really forcing the sodium hydroxide in the water, so your lye water solution, and your fatty acids from your oils to start doing their change in order to create what becomes your soap. And so your triglycerides. Now, with hot process, the benefits to doing that are, well, you get saponification completed faster because in normal cold process recipes, you are working with lower heats, which means that while the soap itself during saponification does heat up, the core temperature of that soap overall does heat up to around 180-ish degrees after you've poured it into the mold. It's not heating up to these temperatures. And so the higher temperatures with this cook does essentially force saponification to be completed sooner than you would get with a cold process recipe, which usually takes 1 to 2 days in general. They're very, very few. You have essentially an unbalanced rather batch of soap if it's taking longer than 48 hours to reach saponification, like you have too much lye or something to that effect. So do keep that in mind. Now, with this hot process recipe, one of the benefits to this is once you've cooked it and you've allowed it to cook out and go through effectively a gel, you can then add your fragrances. You can add any additional additives. You can add your colors, more water or more liquids, just generally, in order to ensure that things are going to survive saponification. And I say ensure, and I don't really quite mean that, because we don't super know what, as far as like essential oils specifically, what does survive saponification. I've done a video on that, and I've given my thoughts on all of that. So you can go check that out if you would like. But it is a nice benefit for if you're working with a fragrance oil that's particularly, weird, or you want to save some money and use essentially less fragrance, because it becomes much like when you're doing a hot process recipe, melt and pour recipe. You don't have to use as much fragrance to ensure that it's going to survive. And so that's a good thing too. But you could also incorporate your additives like the sea moss into the melt and pour, into the hot process at that stage. And you would also do that with any sort of actives that you might put into it, as well as your glycerin, so any of your solvents. Now, the solvents are what really change a hot process recipe into a glycerin soap recipe, because what that's doing is that it's taking all of that soap that we have created, these soap molecules that we have created within the saponification, within what we see with our sodium hydroxide and water and our fatty oils, our fatty acids, and we're putting in these solvents that are going to essentially extend and lengthen your crystalline structure, or whatever they like to call it. And so in doing that, that means that it is easier to melt down and reform and put more colors, scents, any sort of additives in it as you would like. And so basically, once you've completed a cook within a hot process recipe, you can put in your solvents, and that is all going to dissolve all of the soap molecules into the glycerin itself, into the solvents themselves, and create your melt and pour base. Now, that's a cool thing to use. I like, there's definitely a place for glycerin soaps in the world, and usually that place is on my face. Some of my favorite face soap recipes are using a glycerin soap for the actual soap, because it's so it's got so many humectants. It's very awesome. Again, you can put all of your actives in it and your essential oils and all the jazz to ensure that you're really getting all of that goodness within your soap. And so I do like it. One of the problems that you're going to deal with when you're working with a glycerin soap base, though, is really what Kristen did experience with this one, in that she found it to be a little bit drying. And so I want to talk about that within this recipe and why she may have been having issues with that, because she did question it within her stuff, and I thought maybe this is a good time to address it, because that coconut oil, if you remember, it says 30%, that's coming in the no-no zone for so many soap makers. And I disagree with that entirely. Just for the record, I don't think the coconut oil is what's drying this. The majority of my soap recipes have around 30% of coconut oil, just period, across the board. And none of my soaps have ever been drying for anyone in like the decade that I've been a business, but certainly even, before, when I wasn't a business. So this coconut oil at 30%, a lot of people say that it is drying. Why do they say that? Well, they say that because they have in the soap calc coconut oil, as far as, I'm pretty sure it actually says cleansing. Yeah, cleansing. And people equate cleansing to mean drying. And that's not entirely true. It's an easy way to explain it, though, because what that is doing is it's effectively showing how fluffy the lather is going to be, and therefore how effective the cleanse will be. So what it's going to take from your skin. So it's good for a big fluffy lather to, break down any sort of dirt particles or oils or grease or, what have you off of your skin. That's awesome. But in a standard use, if you're just quickly washing your hands or you're washing your body and you're just generally a clean person that stays clean all the time, it can strip your skin of some oils, I guess, technically. But this conditioning with the kaolin clay and everything that's in this, I genuinely do not think that that's what she's working with as far as that's why it's drying. I think the actual culprits here are going to be the castor oil at 13%, as well as the added sea moss, because both castor oil and sea moss are antibacterial, right? And so that is going to be potentially a problem with overly stripping and balancing that skin a little bit too much. Now, since we want the sea moss, we want it to be moisturizing, and we want the castor oil because of the ricinoleic acid making a nice fluffy lather, what I would recommend is actually taking down that castor oil to about 8% and including olive. Okay, now on to the cook. This is cooked for a while, and she's putting in her additives within this. So she'll be putting in her kaolin clay, and she's prepared her sea moss, done all the things, and we're going to get ready for the mixy mix portion of all of this. So in her recipe, she has about 22% olive oil. I would take about 5 points from that castor oil and add it to the olive, and essentially I think this recipe is going to be just a slam dunk. So it's not going to be overly drying at all. You're still going to get the big bubble that you would want from the castor. There is kind of such a thing as using a little bit too much castor, I suppose, because this is one of the consequences. Another consequence of using too much castor oil is your bars can take on a very interesting rubbery feel. Now, this is not something that you're normally going to experience if this recipe itself were done just on its own without putting in the glycerin. I think it would be just fine as is, just a regular cold process recipe. You wouldn't need to change anything, and you would not experience any drying. I think that one of the additional reasons within all of this is because we have so many humectants going on as well as antibacterial stuff. So it could be having, with the addition of the castor oil at this percentage, could be having an unintended effect of actually stripping the skin. Too much humectant, too much of a good thing, effectively, if that makes sense. And so I do think that that will probably be the ticket for all of this. Long way of answering that question. But hey, I love questions. I like to be able to sleuth. And so if anybody else has any other ideas, let me know, as long as those ideas are not reduce the coconut oil, because that's not a thing. Because everybody has given coconut oil such a bad name with, because it associates the big bubble, the fluffiness of the lather with drying, with cleansing, and cleansing means drying because of soap calc. It really does annoy me. But at the same time, we can't really stop using those terms because that's like sort of our common jargon. We understand what that means as soap makers, the soap calc numbers, which are first and foremost not taking into account anything that you're putting in. So any additives that you're putting in that could make something more conditioning or less conditioning. We're also just basically taking into account what the fatty acid itself does. And so what the oil chains do. But those oils don't exist anymore in their original structure once saponification begins. Because again, we're making the triglycerides. And so I think that it's a useful term, cleansing or whatever, but I think maybe we're misusing that to mean drying. And coconut oil, poor coconut oils out there, people are saying don't ever use it like above 20% or some such nonsense. And I disagree completely. So there's that. What do we know about this awesome soap that Kris10 is tackling? We know that she has had really zero problems with all of it. It had a beautiful, shiny, gorgeous look to it when she was doing her mixing with her stir stick. Didn't take a ton of time to get all that done. And then she allowed it to cook down here, and we have what looks like effectively mashed potatoes. That means it's ready to go. She can scrape the ends and get her glycerin in there so we can start doing its dissolving thing, as well as, yep, right there, put in all of your additives. So we're going to put in the sea moss gel as well. Now, her gel looks delightful. It's not exactly applesauce. I think that looks like a proper gel, and I love that. She actually did say within her footage that she soaked her sea moss, and then we saw her use the water that the sea moss was soaked in for the lye solution. She also did mention what I mentioned yesterday about how much it smelled, and I agree, I concur, it smells terrible. And she then said that the rest of the water was used to blend up the sea moss, and then she did say that she got an applesauce type consistency like I did, but she went ahead and put it in the refrigerator and cooled it down, and in that process she ended up getting a gel. Now, that was one thing that I never did with any of my sea moss from the original batch of sea moss gel that I was, playing with. I never did actually put it in the fridge. And so I don't know, maybe chilling it helps with all of that. I'm not sure. I don't know. But that's a good thing to keep in mind for all of it. If you end up with an applesauce type consistency, just stick it in the fridge for a while and maybe you'll get your gel when it's all said and done. Or we could move on to a different type of sea moss, which is ultimately what I had to do. But I don't know. There's lots of different methods, and all of the sudsers are going to tell us wildly different methods throughout all of that, which I super appreciate because, that's important. As you can see, she has put a bit of the sea moss soap, so the melt and pour soap, into her container. Her container is propped up at an angle right now, and then she's taking the heat gun to it to make sure it's hardened, as well as to, I think, probably create some interesting waves, because she's kind of going for the water meets the sand and there's the splash zone in between. And so this is what she's working on here with the white, and she's creating the splash zone. And I think it's a pretty creative way to make a bar of soap, especially since she has it, again, the soap itself is kind of tilted up. And I love that she's utilizing the heat gun to help dry everything out and make sure that it's ready to go and it's not going to seep. One of the benefits of using a homemade melt and pour base, a homemade glycerin soap, is that usually it is kind of thick, like this. And so you don't have to worry about it being overly thin and pouring out onto the counter, because it starts to harden up pretty quickly and it has a bit of a better consistency to it, which is, silly of me to say as I see it, how thin and beautiful this is. But the original one was not, okay? You saw it. It was delightful. So in this, the crock pot that she used, I guess she didn't have a lot of options as far as heat, so she has some issues with the crock pot itself. Things did get pretty thick. She used Dead Sea mud and blue mica for this portion here. So we have the blue mica going on, and so it was hardening up very, very fast, and she doesn't know if that's because the soap just got too hot. Could have been for sure. You can also, with something like this, because melt and pour glycerin soap bases, it can be really dependent on a lot of factors, and one of them is your environment as well as the heat at which they are being made. If you get it too hot, it can start to thicken up, or if it's very, very hot inside the crock and it's a very cold room, it can start to thicken up fast. Again, I think for this, it's not a terrible idea. I like it that she's getting everything really, thicker, faster, so it's not going to leak all over the place. I love it. Look at that. You dropped a spatula. Also my life too. And so it's a possibility for sure. I don't know. I guess work with your medium temperatures within your crock, just as a general rule. I know that I say I cook everything on high, and I do, but also the majority of the time when I make a hot process batch of soap, it boils over the crock and it's a huge mess all over the place. So just cook it on your medium regular settings. And then once you're ready to go to this stage, just go to keep warm and cover it up as much as possible so it's not developing any sort of weird chunks or soaps, like the film on top or anything, would be my recommendation. I don't know. But I love that she decided to try this melt and pour base for this one. This is her first ever time doing sea moss with it, and so I thought, hey, go big or go home. That's excellent. I love that. So yeah, no, I love that she did the damn thing. Go big or go home. You know what I mean? So well done. First sea moss soap. It's an excellent job, and a melt and pour base for that. That's awesome. Let's go check out the end results. Okay, so this is the finished product, and I love how smooth this is. It's so smooth and so shiny, something I absolutely love about glycerin soaps. And as you can tell from this, or I can at least, this is not something that's going to be getting a lot of glycerin dew on it, which I think is great. Her lather test, she did say it was kind of creamy, not bubbly. And this is when she had said that she had some problems with it feeling a little bit too drying on the skin. And so I would recommend removing the castor from the original. If you want to fix this one, I would recommend putting in some additional oils like an olive into your existing batch. If you have more of this melt and pour left over, cook it again and see what comes of it, would be my recommendation. So overall, I think it's an amazing job. And considering she's kind of, been like she did candles. She started candles during the pandemic, and just recently in the last year or two, she started making cold processed soap. And, joined us in the Discord within like the last year or so. She's been amazing. Like, this is such a ballsy move to start making your cold processed soaps, your hot processed soaps, doing it all from scratch, just as a funsies thing. And actually, I don't hate that lather, but I can see what you might mean about it being a little bit drying, for sure. But yeah, well done across the board. Kris10 tackles sea moss, and Kris10 tackles a melt and pour soap base from scratch, a glycerin soap base from scratch. Both first time. Well, the sea moss is for sure first time, but she did them together for the first time, and this is an epic job. Well done. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. Everybody tell her what a good job she did. Yeah, so across the board, I really, really loved this soap. And I talked about, the conditioning things and the drying and whatever within the video itself. I think it's very important to talk about soap calc kind of as often as we can, and remember that cleansing number doesn't necessarily mean drying, and also there are other factors that come into play, but also give recommendations for ways that you could up your moisturizing properties within something like this to ensure that you're going to get a bar of soap that's not going to be drying, stripping the skin of its natural moisture, while using what soap calc sort of quantifies within those fatty acids as a reference point that we can all reasonably understand, So across the board, I really, really enjoyed this soap process. She has won a challenge before, and it was such a stunning soap. She did this beautiful like landscape thing where she was just painting with little, very thin soap batter, just little bits at a time. Super gorgeous. So it was really cool and creative to watch her effectively do the same thing, but now we're sculpting it. And her taking out the heat gun and actually using the heat gun to dry everything in between. Genius. I loved it. It was awesome for sure. I loved her footage just generally, and she had a thing that came out. She wrote a thing to me, and she had like Nick Hornby references in there, which is crazy because High Fidelity is like my favorite book ever. Nick Hornby is one of my favorite writers. And so that was cool because I don't know that I've ever even talked about that on the channel. So it's like, hey, we're kind of alike. That's fun. And she made a Devil Wears Prada reference. It was all great. It was delightful. Kris10 tackles sea moss, and she did a great job. So everybody go show her love. Go tell her how great of a job she did. All the sudsers, do your thing. I know that you are very, very good at doing so. And yeah, Kris10, congratulations. You are definitely a fun sudser to have around. I'm really, really grateful that you are around. And that's true of all of you. But right now, Kris10 won. And she likes Nick Hornby, so I like her a little bit better today. Anytime you talk about books generally, it's going to be the way to my heart. But we have 2 more Project Soapway winners that we get to showcase this week. So we will be doing that tomorrow and Thursday, or possibly Friday, depending on how schedules are lining up. And I'm very, very excited to show you those. These 2 are not going to be a melt and pour, a glycerin soap, a hot process recipe, but they are very, very stunning. Tons of work was put into it, tons of research, tons of education that they are so kind to deliver to us. So stick around for that. Like, comment, subscribe, all the things. Again, tell Kris10 what a great job she did. And I will see you guys all again tomorrow for another round of Project Soapway. Soapy fun. Bye.